Let's jump in on Eintracht Frankfurt and Hugo Ekitike and Newcastle United's bid, which arrived at Eintracht Frankfurt this morning. There's a lot of reports yesterday, including by myself on Transfermarkt on where this is at. It's a little bit of a funny one, Stefan. We always try to provide listeners to this show a little bit more insight into how this all works. There was a lot of reports, Fabrizio Romano, Ornstein, The Athletic, of course, reporting that Newcastle were preparing and sending an offer to Eintracht Frankfurt. When I talked to Frankfurt, they just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, we haven't received anything yet. And the reason for that is that Newcastle are using an intermediary to kind of send offers to other clubs, which is how this gets leaked before the receiving club actually gets the offer. Offer was around 80 million euros. Eintracht Frankfurt said no to the offer. Presumably, you know how this kind of works. It's like kind of like back in grade 9, 10 when you started getting interested in girls and you passed over a note to your friend to send over to the girl, and then she would send back a note that probably said no. At least that's how it was for me. I kind of feel like that's probably how this went. It's one of those weird oddities of the how transfers now work, Stefan, that, in some cases the clubs don't even talk to one another anymore. They use people, like not even agents, but a person that works with the agent to talk to the clubs. It's a little much in my opinion, but I guess that's how the business has gone now, that, you can't just pick up a phone anymore like in the good old days. And if you're the sporting director or manager of Newcastle, if you're Hall, you can't just pick up your phone and phone Markus Krösche and say, hey, how's it going? What do you guys think? You actually have to use a legal intermediary. But that's where we are at now.
Yeah, it is. And, I think especially in Newcastle's situation where they have a lot of money to spend, but have been very curtailed into how they can spend it. They have to do a lot of homework in the transfer window, make sure the few players they can sign hit the ground running. And they obviously outsource a lot of that to different agencies and people and teams and things. And yeah, they've obviously arrived at Hugo Ekitike, who is an interesting one. I wrote an article for Transfermarkt talking about how he would fit in at Newcastle when I was, writing, saying he can play as a number 9, but he can also play as, a player who can play off the number 9, as he did with Omar Marmoush with Eintracht Frankfurt early in the season. So in very kind of similar ways, he can obviously play alongside Alexander Isak. So there's not really any great concern to say that, he is definitively a replacement for Alexander Isak. However, as I was literally writing that piece, news then breaks that Liverpool are looking to try and sign Alexander Isak, and suddenly things become to look very obvious. It looks as though the kind of ducks are lining up, or the dominoes are beginning to fall, whatever expression you want to use, and it looks as though Hugo Ekitike will be signed in one form or another if he can match what Frankfurt want from, which I'm assuming they will. And he'll either be playing alongside Alexander Isak this season, or he'll be in place of him. And I think the great thing about Ekitike is that he can be Isak's replacement, or he can be his strike partner, and he'll do both pretty well, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think that's what makes him such an interesting player. A few weeks ago we talked about Benjamin Sesko's situation and why it was probably for the best that he stayed in the Bundesliga for a year and still learning his trade and still developing into the player he wants to become in the Bundesliga. And I think Ekitike is probably a little further ahead than him in that regard in terms of his development, mostly due to circumstances, obviously, because he went to PSG and he had to kind of learn to be very adaptable to try and get game time there. Didn't quite work out for him, but then he moved to Frankfurt and he more or less had to play second fiddle to Marmoush. But he did that in a way where he obviously complimented him very well. And then when Marmoush moved on, he then became the main man. And he obviously finished the season very strongly as Frankfurt's kind of clear number 9. So, I can completely understand why a club like Newcastle, who have to sign players very carefully, can have a very big squad, can look at a guy like Ekitike and say, well, we can sign him this summer. he can play off the striker. He can play on the left if we need be. But in time, he can maybe even replace Isaac if we do sell Isaac. And that seems to be the way it's looking, Manu. So, Frankfurt just keep doing this. They keep just finding these guys. I mean, how long has he been at Frankfurt? It must be like, 12 months, 18 months at this point. And yeah, it looks like they're going to make another remarkable profit on him. I remember, I could still remember when they were selling Cole Moani and they bought Ekitike for 20 million euros, I think it was.
Well, yeah, it was a little late, right? Because they sold Cole Moani. I think PSG actually got the deadline extended that summer to sign Cole Moani. So Frankfurt didn't have the time to sign a replacement, but then they brought in Ekitike in that February. On loan for 3.5 million, and then made that deal permanent the following summer for 16.5 million. So it's a 20 million euro deal. I understand PSG hold about 20% of the transfer rights. So, I think that also plays a role why Frankfurt are probably looking for a certain figure in their head of what they want to generate. But yeah, this is remarkable. I mean, his value since he's been in Frankfurt has skyrocketed. So, and they have done this with many players. Kolo Muani, of course, didn't quite work out at PSG. Omar Mamouche is working out really well at Man City. I think it's with a mixed bag when these players leave Frankfurt. But I do think when I look at Ekitike and the way he plays, and you mentioned all the reasons, I think he is probably going to be a more of the Mamouche caliber, going to Newcastle, or whether it's Liverpool, who are apparently also interested. Then I think that would work better. I think the Kolo Muani PSG move was always a misunderstanding because then they brought in Luis Enrique. I wrote a big article on him on Transfermarkt, right? And the way he plays football, and he doesn't really like to play with number 9, so that kind of ruined it for Kolo Muani. But I think Hugo Ekitike is so adaptable, can play so many different roles that if he does move, I think he'd be a success, whether it's in Newcastle or Liverpool. But I think, Stefan, it's going to take a lot more than the offer that was made this morning, right? I was told it's 80 million euros. Sky is reporting that Frankfurt didn't like the way the deal was structured. I was told something completely different. I was told it's just not enough. Which sounds very different, doesn't it? It's like, well, Sky is like, well, they didn't like the way it was structured because it was in like 4 or 5 payments. And I spoke to people at Frankfurt and they were like, no, we just didn't think it was enough. we just want more, like the structure was almost the secondary issue. The problem was that there wasn't a 1 in front of 2 zeros and a million. So
So, I guess the question is, do you think they'll hold out for that amount?
Yeah, of course they will, because they will get it.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is, and you kind of touched on it there, we've talked about it before the show, that the Athletic, who reported that Liverpool were interested in Alexander Isaac, also said, then Fabrizio Romano then came out and said that if they don't get Isaac, they'll then go for Ekitike, and there could be the situation where Liverpool and Newcastle are competing for Ekitike's signature, which would be interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting one. I mean, the thing is, like, Frankfurt obviously have a very strong hand in this, where they can basically set the price and say, here's what we want. And they've obviously kind of got this reputation for being a club that, do sell strikers for a very high fee. And they've done it for a lot of players. I guess the question is, Manu, not a lot of those players have actually gone on to be very good. Kolo Muani struggling for a game at PSG. To be fair, he went on loan to Juventus and did very well there, so you never know, he might move on, but I'm sure PSG probably regret paying 95 million euros for him.
They don't care, it's not real money for them.
Well, yeah, true. Look at Jovic, obviously, to Real Madrid didn't work out. Sebastian Haller at West Ham didn't work out. And then you can go all the way down. I mean, it drops off quite quickly, I suppose, and you've got like Andre Silva to RB Leipzig and stuff like that. But obviously, Marmouche is the obvious exception there, and he's obviously doing very, very well at Manchester City. So Frankfurt could probably point to that and say, well, Marmouche is doing very well. Ekitike played very similar numbers, so he should do well in the Premier League as well.
Yeah,
I guess that's just what it's going to come down to, isn't it?
I,
It comes to
I,
that.
I've,
That's what
I've
the
a
market's based on.